General Vextar stood on the bridge of his massive warship, looking at the blue planet through the viewing screen. Earth hung in space like a perfect marble, completely unaware of what was coming. His 4 eyes moved in different directions as he studied the tactical displays. 300 ships of the Dominion fleet waited behind him, enough firepower to glass the entire planet twice over. This would be his 48th conquest. 47 worlds had already fallen to his fleet, and each victory had followed the same pattern. Show overwhelming force, demand surrender, occupy the planet. Simple, clean, efficient. The primitive species always chose to live rather than die uselessly. Vextar's communication officer, a thin creature with purple scales, turned to face him. General, we are receiving multiple signals from the planet. They appear to be military frequencies. Let them talk, Vextar said, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had never lost a battle. Fear makes them chatter like nest birds. Soon they will understand. Captain Lee Dongwu sat in the command center of Orbital Station New Seoul, watching the alien fleet through the long-range scanners. The ships were enormous, each one bigger than anything humanity had ever built. Their energy readings showed power levels that made Earth's greatest battleships look like toys. Captain, Lieutenant Commander Park Ji-hai said from her station, "We're getting an incoming transmission. It's coming from the largest ship." Dongwu was a man in his 50s with gray hair and scars from the resource wars. He had seen enough fighting to know when the odds were impossible, but he had also learned that impossible odds didn't mean you stopped fighting. "Put it on the main screen," he ordered. The alien that appeared was unlike anything in Earth's databases. 4 eyes, pale blue skin, and a mouth that moved in strange ways when it spoke. The universal translator worked, but the voice sounded cold and mechanical. "I am General Vextar of the Galactic Dominion. Your species has been selected for integration into our empire. You have 1 rotation of your planet to surrender unconditionally. Comply, and your people will live as subjects. Resist, and your species will be eliminated." The transmission ended, leaving silence in the command center. Park Ji-hai looked at her captain. "Sir, what should we tell them?" Dongwu thought about his daughter back on Earth, about the billions of people who would never kneel to aliens, about the human spirit that had carried them from caves to the stars. Tell them humanity doesn't surrender. General Vextar received the human response with something close to amusement. In his long military career, he had heard every kind of defiance. Young species always tried to sound brave at first. They would change their minds quickly when the shooting started. Primitive bravado, he told his officers. They will learn better soon enough. His tactical advisor, a being with tentacles instead of arms, brought up the human military analysis on the holographic display. "General, their technology is approximately 800 years behind ours. Kinetic weapons, chemical explosives, nuclear fission devices. No energy shields, no plasma weapons, no faster-than-light capability." Vextar nodded. "Standard procedure, then. Target their orbital installations first, then their major population centers. Keep casualties minimal until they surrender." But something bothered him about the human response. Most species at least tried to negotiate, to buy time or ask for better terms. These humans had simply said no and cut the transmission. On Earth, emergency meetings were happening in every major government building. President Kim Soo-jin stood in the war room deep beneath Seoul, surrounded by her top military advisors. The holographic display showed the alien fleet in perfect detail. "How long can we hold out?" she asked. General Ryu Won-jae, head of the Defense Corps, studied the numbers. "Honestly, Madam President, our space forces might last 6 hours. Our planetary defenses may be 2 days. They have us outgunned in every category. But you have a plan." "We have plans," Ryu said grimly. "None of them involve winning a conventional war." Colonel Baek Min-ho spoke up from his position near the tactical display. "Ma'am, we've run every simulation. We can't beat them in open battle, but we can make them pay for every inch." The president looked around the room at the faces of her military leaders. These were people who had fought in 3 different wars, who understood the cost of conflict, and every one of them had the same look in their eyes. "Then we make them pay," she said. Captain Kim Tae-jin received his orders while his small frigate Busan's Pride was hiding in the shadow of an asteroid. His ship was barely 200 meters long, with armor that wouldn't stop a plasma blast and weapons that were older than he was. The orders were simple: cause maximum damage to the enemy fleet. Kim looked at his crew of 35 people. They were young, most of them barely out of training. They had joined the Space Force to explore the galaxy, not to die fighting aliens. "Listen up," Kim told them over the ship's communication system. "We just got word from Command. The aliens want us to surrender." Earth Command told them no. Now we show them what that means. He paused, looking out at the massive alien fleet through the view screen. "I'm not going to lie to you. We probably won't survive this fight, but we're going to make sure they remember us." His weapons officer, Ensign O. Youngsik, spoke up. "What are our orders, Captain?" Kim smiled, but it wasn't a happy expression. "Load the cargo bay with every nuclear warhead we have. Set course for the biggest ship in their fleet, and transmit our call sign on all frequencies so everyone knows who we are." General Vextar watched the human fleet begin to move. 67 ships of various sizes, all of them pathetically outmatched. His own fleet had more firepower in its smallest escort vessels than the humans had in their entire navy. "Begin the attack," he ordered. The space battle that followed was unlike anything Vextar had ever seen. The human ships didn't try to fight at long range like civilized forces. Instead, they accelerated directly toward his fleet, taking massive damage but never changing course. The first human ship to reach his lines was a small frigate. Vextar's point defense systems tore it apart piece by piece, but it kept coming. At the last second, it detonated every weapon it carried in a massive nuclear explosion. His flagship's shields held, but the blast was powerful enough to overload several systems. "What kind of tactic is this?" his tactical advisor asked. Before Vextar could answer, another human ship did the same thing. Then another. The humans were using their own ships as guided missiles, piloted bombs that got closer than any sane species would dare. Within an hour, the human fleet was gone, but they had taken 8 Dominion ships with them, including 2 cruisers. Vextar stared at the tactical display showing the debris field. In 47 previous conquests, no species had ever damaged his fleet this badly in their opening attack, and the humans had done it by choosing to die. "General," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the planet's surface." The message was short and came from their military commander. "Round 1 to us, alien. Welcome to human warfare." For the first time in his long career, General Vextar felt uncertain about his victory. 3 weeks after the first battle, General Vextar was beginning to understand that humans fought differently than any species he had encountered. His tactical computers had analyzed every known form of warfare, but they had no data for enemies who treated death as just another weapon. The Dominion fleet had moved closer to Earth, establishing a blockade around the planet. Standard procedure was to cut off supply lines and wait for surrender, but the humans weren't behaving according to standard procedure. Commander Yuan Seo piloted her destroyer through the asteroid field near Mars, hunting for an opportunity. Her ship was damaged from the previous week's fighting. Her crew was exhausted and her ammunition was running low. But she had spotted something interesting on her sensors. A Dominion supply convoy was moving through the outer system, protected by only 3 escort ships. The aliens felt safe because no human vessel had ever attacked their logistics operations. They expected humans to fight honorably, to target military installations and leave civilian support alone. They were about to learn better. "All stations prepare for attack run," Yu announced to her crew. "Target the fuel tanker in the center of their formation." Her tactical officer, Lieutenant Nam Ki-tae, looked confused. "Ma'am, that ship isn't armed. It's carrying supplies for their fleet." "Exactly," Yu said grimly. "No fuel means their big ships can't maneuver. No supplies means their crews go hungry. We're going to teach them that everything is a target in this war." The attack caught the Dominion escort completely off guard. Yu's destroyer came in fast and low, using the bulk of an asteroid to mask her approach. By the time the alien sensors detected her, she was already firing. Her missiles tore into the supply convoy, turning 3 ships into expanding balls of plasma. The escort vessels tried to respond, but Yu was already accelerating away, using every trick she had learned in 20 years of military service. General Vextar received the report of the attack with growing concern. Civilized species didn't target supply lines. They fought battles between military forces and left logistics alone. But these humans seemed to consider everything part of the war. "Sir," his intelligence officer reported, "we've intercepted more human communications. They're calling it total war. Every asset, military or civilian, is considered a legitimate target." Vextar's 4 eyes moved independently as he processed this information. What about their own civilians? Surely they protect their non-combatants. That's just it, General. We're not sure they have any non-combatants. The evidence for this disturbing conclusion was mounting. On Luna, humanity's moon, the local population was supposed to be primarily miners and researchers. But when Dominion ground forces landed, they found the entire colony had been converted into a fortress. Colonel Beck Minho had been preparing Luna's defenses for months. Every tunnel had been rigged with explosives. Every intersection had been turned into a kill zone. And every civilian had been armed and trained. Remember, Beck told his mixed force of soldiers and miners, they have better weapons and armor, but they don't know these tunnels like we do. Make them pay for every meter. The battle for Luna Colony lasted 6 days. The Dominion forces had plasma weapons that could cut through rock, personal shields that deflected most projectiles, and advanced sensors that could track movement in the dark. But they had never fought in an environment where every corridor was a trap, where the walls themselves could explode without warning, where the enemy knew exactly where you were but you had no idea where they might be hiding. Dr. Choi So-young had been a mining engineer before the war. Now she was something the Dominion had never encountered, a civilian who had weaponized her professional knowledge. She had turned industrial equipment into improvised cannons, construction vehicles into armored fighting platforms, and her deep knowledge of Luna's geology into a strategic advantage. Collapse Tunnel 7, she radioed to the demolition team. Drive them toward Section 12. The Dominion forces found themselves herded through the lunar underground like animals through a maze. Every time they advanced, the tunnels behind them were destroyed. Every time they tried to retreat, they found their path blocked by rubble and explosives. Major Han Seok-ho led the final defense of Luna's main habitat. His force consisted of 30 soldiers, 50 miners, and a handful of scientists who had refused evacuation. They were facing 200 Dominion Marines with full combat armor and energy weapons. The aliens expected a conventional battle. Instead, they found themselves fighting in a 3-dimensional maze where the enemy could attack from any direction, where every room might be booby-trapped, where the lights could go out without warning. Han's people had grown up in low gravity. They could move through the tunnels in ways that confused and disoriented the alien troops. They used magnetic boots to walk on ceilings, launched themselves through ventilation shafts, and attacked from angles that made no sense to beings who had evolved on high-gravity worlds. When the Dominion forces finally captured Luna Colony, they found it empty. The humans had evacuated through maintenance tunnels that didn't appear on any official map. They had taken their wounded, their equipment, and their knowledge with them. All they left behind was a message painted on the wall of the main command center. You can have the rocks. We'll keep the war. General Vextar studied the casualty reports from Luna with growing alarm. His forces had taken the objective, but they had lost 47 troops doing it. More importantly, they had learned that every human installation was going to be a fortress. Every human civilian was going to be a potential combatant. The tactical implications were staggering. Occupying human space would require massive garrison forces on every world, constant vigilance against populations that considered guerrilla warfare a civic duty. But the real shock came from intelligence reports about human industrial capacity. Dr. Yang Miran had been working in a hidden laboratory on Earth's far side, using resources evacuated from Luna to accelerate weapons development. The humans weren't just fighting with what they had when the war started. They were adapting, learning, building new tools for killing. General, his science officer, reported, the humans have developed something they're calling kinetic kill vehicles. They're converting civilian spacecraft into guided missiles. Vextar watched the tactical display as dozens of human cargo ships, passenger liners, and industrial platforms began accelerating toward his fleet. Each one had been loaded with explosives, fitted with basic guidance systems and aimed at Dominion vessels. Captain Ojine had volunteered to pilot the first conversion. Her cargo hauler normally carried grain between Earth and Mars, but now its holds were packed with compressed hydrogen and metal fragments. She knew she wasn't coming back. This is for every human who won't live to see victory, she transmitted as her ship approached the Dominion fleet. The aliens shot down most of the converted vessels, but several got through. When they detonated, they proved that humans could turn anything into a weapon if they were desperate enough. Vextar realized that his enemy wasn't just the human military. It was the entire human species. Every ship, every building, every person was a potential threat. The humans had weaponized their entire civilization. He had come expecting to fight an army. Instead, he was fighting a whole race that had decided death was preferable to surrender, and they were getting better at it every day. "Sir," his communications officer announced, "we're receiving a transmission from Earth's government." The human president appeared on screen, her face showing the strain of weeks under siege, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "General Vextar, you've seen what we're willing to do to defend our freedom. This is just the beginning. Every day you stay in our system, we learn more about how to kill your people. Every battle teaches us your weaknesses. Every ship you lose makes our victory more certain." She paused, and Vextar could see something in her eyes that chilled him. It was the look of someone who had already accepted the worst possible outcome. "You can have Earth," she continued, "but you'll have to kill every human to keep it, and we'll make sure that costs you everything." For the first time since the war began, General Vextar wondered if victory was worth the price. 2 months into the war, General Vextar had learned to fear human creativity more than their weapons. The reports coming from his ground commanders painted a picture of warfare that violated every principle of civilized conflict. On Mars, what should have been a simple occupation had turned into a nightmare of booby traps and ambushes. The human colonists had evacuated the major settlements, but they hadn't gone far. Instead, they had disappeared into the planet's vast canyon systems and underground installations, emerging only to strike at Dominion supply lines. Lieutenant Colonel Park Taesu led a team of Mars colonists who had once been terraforming engineers. They knew every tunnel, every maintenance shaft, every hidden passage in the colony networks. More importantly, they knew how to use industrial equipment in ways that would never appear in any military manual. "Target the water reclamation plant," Park instructed his team. "When they try to repair it, we hit them with the mining charges we placed last week." His fighters weren't soldiers in any traditional sense. They were farmers, miners, technicians, and scientists who had learned to wage war with the tools of their trade. They used irrigation systems to flood Dominion positions, reprogrammed construction robots to carry explosives, and turned atmospheric processors into chemical weapons. The Dominion forces found themselves fighting an enemy that appeared and disappeared like ghosts, that turned the very infrastructure they were trying to capture into a weapon against them. General Vextar received reports of similar problems from every human world his forces had tried to occupy. On Titan, the methane refineries had been booby-trapped so thoroughly that his engineers were afraid to touch anything. On Europa, the ice miners had turned their boring equipment into artillery pieces that could fire through several kilometers of frozen ocean. But the worst reports came from Earth itself, where Major Yoon Jae-hyuk was implementing something the humans called the Scorched Earth Protocol. Yoon had been a civil engineer before the war, responsible for designing the fusion power plants that supplied energy to Earth's major cities. Now he was using that knowledge to turn those same plants into planet-killing weapons. Every power station, every industrial complex, every piece of infrastructure that could be useful to an occupying force, Yoon explained to his team. All of it gets rigged to explode if the aliens try to take it. His engineers worked around the clock, installing hidden charges in bridges, tunnels, spaceports, and manufacturing centers. The message to the Dominion was clear. If you want Earth, you can have the radioactive ruins. Dr. Nam Hai-wan represented another kind of human warfare that terrified General Vextar. She had been a medical researcher, working on nanotechnology for treating cancer. When the war started, she had turned her healing machines into weapons of biological warfare. The beauty of it, she explained to her research team, is that their biology is similar enough to ours that the nanobots will work, but different enough that we can target them specifically. Her laboratory, hidden in the ruins of Geneva, had become a factory for microscopic weapons. The nanobots could be introduced into air and water supplies, could survive for weeks in hostile environments, and could kill aliens while leaving humans completely unharmed. The Dominion had never encountered biological warfare on this scale. Their medical systems were designed to treat injuries and diseases, not to fight off artificial organisms specifically designed to destroy their cellular structure. General Vextar studied the reports from his medical officers with growing horror. They're turning their healing technology into weapons? Yes, sir. We've lost 300 troops to various forms of biological attack. The humans appear to be field testing different approaches to see which ones work best. This was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of human warfare. They treated each battle as a learning experience, constantly adapting and improving their methods. Every Dominion victory taught the humans something new about alien weaknesses. Commander Lee Kyung-min exemplified this adaptive approach. She had started the war as a maintenance engineer on a cargo station. But after 2 months of fighting, she had become something unprecedented, a civilian who specialized in converting non-military equipment into weapons. The key, she explained to a group of refugees who had volunteered to fight, is to think about what these things were designed to do, then figure out how to make them do something else. Under her guidance, asteroid miners became kinetic bombardment platforms. Agricultural ships became carriers for biological weapons. Even passenger liners were converted into troop transports capable of fighting their way through enemy blockades. The humans had weaponized their entire civilization, turning every tool, every machine, every piece of technology into a potential instrument of war. But perhaps most terrifying of all was the human approach to intelligence gathering. Captain Song Hyun-woo had been a communications officer before the war. Now she led a network of spies, saboteurs, and information gatherers that penetrated deep into Dominion-occupied territory. "We need to know everything about them," Song told her agents. "How they think, how they fight, what scares them. Every piece of information is a weapon." Her people were everywhere. They posed as refugees, as laborers, even as corpses in battlefield cleanup crews. They learned alien languages, studied enemy tactics, and gathered intelligence that was immediately transmitted to human forces throughout the system. General Vextar began to realize that his enemy knew more about his own forces than he did. Human attacks were precisely targeted at Dominion weaknesses. Human defenses anticipated alien tactics before they were implemented. It was as if the humans could read his mind. "Sir," his intelligence chief reported, "we've discovered that the humans have been monitoring our communications for weeks. They've broken our encryption codes and are listening to everything we transmit." This revelation explained much about recent human successes, but it also raised a disturbing question. What else did the humans know? The answer came during the Battle of the Belt, when human forces demonstrated a new level of tactical sophistication that shocked even Vextar's experienced officers. Colonel Kim Min-jae had been a logistics coordinator before the war, responsible for managing shipping routes through the asteroid belt. Now she used that knowledge to turn the belt itself into a weapon. "Every rock out here is a potential kinetic weapon," she explained to her crew. "We just need to give them a little push in the right direction." Her converted mining ships used industrial equipment to nudge asteroids out of their stable orbits, sending them on collision courses with Dominion vessels. The attacks came from multiple directions simultaneously, forcing the alien fleet to scatter and making coordinated defense impossible. But Kim's real innovation was using the asteroids as cover for conventional attacks. While Dominion forces were busy avoiding collision with flying rocks, human ships emerged from hiding places throughout the belt, launching surprise attacks at point-blank range. "The humans are using our own size against us," Vextar's tactical officer observed. "Our big ships can't maneuver quickly enough in the asteroid field. Their small vessels have all the advantages." The Battle of the Belt lasted 18 hours and ended with the Dominion fleet in full retreat. Vextar had lost 12 major vessels and suffered damage to dozens more. The humans had lost 6 ships and had somehow managed to capture enough alien equipment to reverse-engineer Dominion shield technology. As his battered fleet regrouped at the edge of the system, Vextar received a message from Earth's military command. It was short and to the point. "General, you've been fighting us for 2 months and we're still here. Every day you stay, we get stronger. Every battle you fight, we learn something new. Every ship you lose, we study and improve. How long do you think you can keep this up?" For the first time in his military career, General Vextar didn't have an answer. 4 months into what should have been a simple conquest, General Vextar found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about warfare. The humans had lost every major battle, suffered casualties that would have broken any civilized species, and watched their worlds burn under Dominion bombardment. Yet somehow they were winning. The evidence was undeniable in his daily reports. His fleet had shrunk from 300 ships to 230. His ground forces were stretched thin across a dozen occupied worlds, constantly fighting guerrilla actions that drained resources and morale. Most disturbing of all, human attacks were becoming more sophisticated, more targeted, more effective. Captain O-Jin-A represented everything that terrified Vextar about human warfare. She was 73 years old, a grandmother who had spent her life operating cargo haulers between Earth and the outer colonies. She had never fired a weapon in anger, never served in the military, never shown any inclination toward violence, until the aliens invaded her home system. "I volunteer for the mission," O announced at the resistance meeting in the ruins of Ceres Station. Around her sat the mixed group of survivors who had become humanity's last hope in the asteroid belt. Former miners, cargo pilots, maintenance workers, and a handful of actual soldiers. "Ma'am," said Lieutenant Park Daeho, one of the few military personnel present, "this is a suicide mission. The target is heavily defended. We don't expect anyone to come back." O smiled, and it was the expression of someone who had already made her peace with death. "Young man, my children are dead. My grandchildren are scattered across the galaxy, hiding from your aliens. I've got nothing left to lose and everything to give." Her plan was simple in the way that only the most devastating attacks could be. She would load her cargo hauler with compressed antimatter, approach the Dominion fleet anchorage under the pretense of carrying medical supplies, and detonate her ship inside their defensive perimeter. One old woman in a freight hauler against an entire enemy fleet, she mused to herself as she prepared for launch. My grandmother would have laughed at the odds. General Vextar monitored the approach of the human vessel with professional interest. His sensors showed a single cargo ship, broadcasting medical emergency codes and requesting permission to dock with the hospital ship. Standard procedure would be to grant permission after a security scan, but 4 months of fighting humans had taught him that nothing about them was standard. "Full scan of that vessel," he ordered. "I want to know what they're really carrying." The scans revealed massive energy readings from the cargo hold, far beyond anything a medical supply ship should contain. But by then, Captain O was already inside the fleet's defensive perimeter, accelerating toward the largest concentration of ships. "This is Captain O-Jin-A of the Earth Resistance," she transmitted on all frequencies. "I'm 73 years old. I've been a cargo pilot for 50 years, a wife for 45, and a grandmother for 20. I've never killed anyone in my life." Vexitar watched his point defense systems open fire, trying to stop the approaching vessel. Plasma bolts tore through its hull, but it kept coming. "Today I'm going to kill as many of you aliens as I can," O continued calmly. "This is for my granddaughter Hye-Jin, who died defending Luna. This is for my grandson Minsu, who was on Mars when you glassed the colonies. This is for every human child who will never grow up because you decided we should be slaves." The cargo hauler detonated in the middle of the Dominion fleet, and for a moment Vexitar's bridge was bathed in the light of a miniature star. When the sensors cleared, he found that a 73-year-old grandmother had just destroyed 4 of his cruisers and crippled 2 more. But that wasn't what broke his spirit. It was the discovery, in the aftermath of the attack, that Captain O had been one of hundreds of elderly civilians who had volunteered for similar missions. Across human space, grandparents were converting their personal vehicles into weapons, loading them with whatever explosives they could find, and flying them into Dominion targets. "They're using their elders as weapons," his intelligence officer reported with something approaching awe. "The old humans volunteer because they say they've already lived their lives." Dr. Choi So-young embodied another aspect of human warfare that defied all of Vextar's military experience. She had been a pediatric surgeon before the war, dedicated to saving children's lives. Now she was saving children by turning herself into a biological weapon. "The nanobots need a living host to remain active," she explained, to her research team from her laboratory, beneath the ruins of Seoul. "Someone has to carry them into the occupied zones." She had infected herself with dozens of different nanotechnological weapons, each one designed to target a specific aspect of Dominion physiology. Her body had become a living laboratory, testing which weapons were most effective against alien biology. "I give myself maybe 3 weeks before the accumulated damage kills me," she said matter-of-factly. "That's enough time to visit 6 or 7 occupied cities." Dr. Choi walked openly through Dominion checkpoints, appearing to be just another human refugee seeking medical aid. But everywhere she went, alien troops began falling ill with mysterious diseases that their medical systems couldn't identify or treat. She was dying slowly, her body consuming itself to power the weapons she carried, but she was taking hundreds of enemy soldiers with her. Major Yoon Jae-hyuk represented the terrifying efficiency of human desperation. He had been an urban planner before the war, designing cities that could house millions of people in comfort and safety. Now he was designing their destruction. Every major population center has been rigged, he reported to Earth Command, from his position in the underground bunkers beneath New Tokyo. If the aliens try to occupy our cities, we can level them at the touch of a button. His teams had spent months placing fusion charges in key structural points throughout Earth's urban areas. Hospitals, schools, residential complexes, cultural centers. Everything that made human civilization worth preserving had been turned into a potential weapon. We're not just threatening to destroy the infrastructure, Yoon explained to his demolition teams. We're threatening to destroy the very idea of human civilization. If we can't have it, nobody can. But perhaps most disturbing to General Vextar was the discovery that human scientists were making breakthrough advances even while their worlds burned around them. Dr. Yang Mi-ran had continued her research into faster-than-light travel from a laboratory hidden in the Kuiper Belt, using resources and personnel evacuated from Earth's universities. We're approximately 6 months away from a working FTL drive, she reported to the Resistance leadership during a coded transmission. Once we have that technology, the war changes completely. Vextar intercepted this communication and immediately understood its implications. If humans developed FTL capability, they wouldn't be trapped in their home system anymore. They would take their suicidal brand of warfare to every Dominion world in the galaxy. Sir, his strategic advisor said during their daily planning meeting, we need to consider the long-term implications of this conflict. Even if we win, what happens next? It was a question that had been haunting Vextar for weeks. Occupying human space would require massive resources. The humans had proven that they would never stop fighting, never stop looking for ways to kill their occupiers. Garrison duty on human worlds would be a death sentence for Dominion troops. And if the humans developed interstellar travel, they would export their warfare to the entire galaxy. Every Dominion world would become a target for suicide attacks, biological weapons, and the kind of creative destruction that turned civilian infrastructure into military assets. General, his communications officer announced, we're receiving another transmission from the human government. President Kim Soo-jin appeared on screen, and Vextar was shocked by her appearance. She had lost weight. Her hair had gone completely gray and there were dark circles under her eyes, but her voice was as steady as ever. General Vextar, I want you to understand something. We're not fighting this war to win it. We're fighting it to make sure that even if you kill every human in the galaxy, the cost will destroy your empire. She gestured to something off-screen, and the display showed footage of human children, some as young as 12, training with weapons and explosives. These children will never surrender. They'll grow up knowing that death is preferable to slavery, and if you kill them, there will be others. We've taught an entire generation that the highest honor is to die killing aliens. The transmission ended, leaving Vextar staring at a blank screen. For the first time in his military career, he understood that victory might be indistinguishable from defeat. He was fighting an enemy that had weaponized their own extinction. 6 months after the invasion began, General Vextar faced a reality that violated every principle of military strategy he had ever learned. His forces controlled most of the major human installations. His fleet dominated the space around Earth, and by every conventional measure, the Dominion was winning the war. Yet somehow, he was losing. The final revelation came during what would later be called the Battle of Terra's Moon. Admiral Song Hyun-woo had gathered the scattered remnants of humanity's space fleet for what everyone knew would be their last stand. 57 damaged ships against 230 Dominion vessels. The outcome was never in question, but the humans attacked anyway. All ships, this is Admiral Song. The transmission crackled across Vextar's communication channels. Today we die. But we die as free humans, and we take as many of these alien bastards with us as we can. Vextar watched through his command displays as the pitiful human fleet accelerated toward his battle line. Their ships were held together with spare parts and desperate hope. Many of them were converted civilian vessels, cargo haulers and passenger liners that had been fitted with whatever weapons their crews could find. Leading the charge was Song's flagship, a heavy cruiser that had lost most of its armor in previous battles. Behind her came destroyers with missing weapon turrets, frigates leaking atmosphere, and fighters piloted by teenagers who had learned to fly in the middle of a war. They can't possibly believe they can win, Vextar's tactical officer observed. But as the battle began, Vextar realized that winning had never been the point. Ensign Kang Subin was 19 years old and had been piloting fighters for exactly 3 months. Her parents had died in the bombing of New Seoul. Her brother had been killed defending Mars, and she had volunteered for military service on her 18th birthday with a single goal in mind: kill aliens. Phoenix Squadron, follow me in, she transmitted to the 5 other pilots in her formation. Target the engine exhausts on the big ships. Get as close as you can before you fire. Her fighter was a converted racing yacht, fast but fragile, with just enough firepower to damage a larger vessel if she could get close enough. She knew she wasn't coming back from this attack, but that had never been part of the plan. Kang dove her fighter directly into the plasma streams from a Dominion battleship's main engines, using the exhaust plume as cover to approach the ship's most vulnerable areas. The heat cooked her ship's systems one by one, but she held course until she was close enough to ram her remaining missiles directly into the engine housing. The explosion that followed disabled the battleship and killed Kang instantly. It also inspired the other human pilots to attempt equally suicidal attacks. Chief Petty Officer Lee Kyungmin commanded the engineering section aboard Admiral Song's flagship when the Dominion fleet's return fire began tearing the ship apart. She was 54 years old, a career military engineer who had served on starships for 30 years. "Ma'am," her assistant reported, "we've lost main power. Emergency systems are failing. Hull breach on deck 7 through 12. Lee looked around at her engineering crew, men and women who had kept human ships running through 6 months of impossible warfare. "All right, people, time for the final lesson. Anyone who wants to evacuate to the escape pods can go now." Nobody moved. "Then let's show these aliens how humans say goodbye," Lee said grimly. She began the process of manually overloading the ship's fusion reactor, a procedure that would normally take an hour of careful preparation. But Lee and her team had practiced emergency overloads for months, turning what should have been a safety protocol into a weapon. "Admiral," she called to the bridge, "you've got maybe 10 minutes before this whole ship becomes a very large bomb. I suggest you point us at something important." Admiral Song's cruiser, now basically a guided missile with a crew of 800 volunteers, accelerated toward the center of the Dominion fleet. The aliens concentrated their fire on the approaching vessel, but human damage control teams kept it flying, even as entire sections were blown away. When the ship finally detonated, it took 3 Dominion vessels with it and severely damaged 2 more. General Vextar watched similar scenes play out across the battlefield. Human ships ramming alien vessels when their weapons failed. Human crews manually overloading their reactors to create bigger explosions. Human pilots flying damaged fighters directly into Dominion weapon emplacements. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it ended, the human fleet had been completely destroyed, but they had taken 47 Dominion ships with them, including 2 dreadnoughts. "Sir," Vextar's damage control officer reported, "we've lost nearly 20% of our remaining fleet. At this rate of attrition?" "I know," Vextar said quietly. That night, alone in his quarters, General Vextar performed the calculations that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The humans were losing every battle, but improving their kill ratios with each engagement. At current rates, the Dominion would eventually conquer Earth, but the victory would cost them their entire invasion fleet. And then what? Occupation of human worlds would require constant vigilance against a population that considered suicide bombing a patriotic duty. Garrison troops would face daily attacks from enemies who appeared to be civilians until they detonated hidden explosives. But the worst revelation came from his intelligence department's analysis of intercepted human communications. Dr. Yang, Miran's research team had made their breakthrough. Humanity now had faster-than-light travel capability. "Sir," his intelligence chief reported, "the humans have successfully tested their first FTL drive. They're already beginning construction of new vessels using this technology. Vextar understood immediately what this meant. The humans wouldn't stay trapped in their home system. They would take their brand of total warfare to every Dominion world in the galaxy. Suicide attacks on civilian targets, biological weapons released in population centers, industrial accidents that were actually sabotage. Every Dominion world would become a target. Every alien civilian would become a potential victim. The humans would turn the entire galaxy into a war zone where victory was indistinguishable from mutual annihilation. General, his communications officer announced, priority transmission from Dominion High Command. The message was brief and to the point. The High Command wanted a status report on the conquest of Earth and an estimate for when the human system would be fully pacified. Vextar stared at the transmission for a long time before composing his response. To Dominion High Command, he began. After 6 months of combat operations in the Sol system, I must report that the humans represent a threat unlike any encountered in our military history. They do not fight wars to win territory or resources. They fight wars to ensure that their enemies cannot survive victory. He paused, thinking about Captain Ojin, the 73-year-old grandmother who had destroyed 4 of his cruisers. About Dr. Choi So-young, who had turned herself into a living weapon. About Ensign Kang Subin, the teenager who had flown her fighter into the heart of a battleship. The humans have weaponized their entire civilization. He continued, every tool becomes a weapon. Every civilian becomes a combatant. Every defeat becomes a lesson for future attacks. They are learning to kill us more efficiently with each engagement. Vextar stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at Earth. Even from this distance, he could see the lights of human cities, still functioning despite months of bombardment. Most critically, the humans have developed faster than light travel. If allowed to escape their home system, they will export their warfare to every world in the galaxy. They will turn our entire empire into a battlefield where the cost of victory equals the price of defeat. He returned to his desk and typed the final paragraph of what would become the most important military communication in Dominion history. I therefore recommend immediate withdrawal from the Sol system and the establishment of a permanent quarantine around human space. Some species are too dangerous to conquer. The humans are not a civilization to be absorbed into our empire. They are a plague that spreads through warfare, and the only way to stop them is to leave them alone. Vextar transmitted the message and then composed a second, shorter communication. To Dominion High Command, I hereby submit my resignation from military service effective immediately. I can no longer in good conscience lead forces against an enemy that has taught me the true meaning of war. 3 days later, the Dominion fleet departed Earth system. General Vextar's final log entry was discovered years later by human salvage teams. The humans didn't win because they were stronger or smarter or better equipped. They won because they were willing to pay any price for freedom, and they made us understand that the cost of victory against such an enemy is indistinguishable from defeat. Captain Lee Dongwu watched the alien ships disappear into hyperspace from the bridge of Orbital Station New Sol. Around him, his surviving crew members cheered and celebrated humanity's victory. But Dongwu felt no joy. He looked out at the debris fields where so many human ships had died, at the scarred surface of Earth below, at the empty spaces where thriving colonies had once orbited. They had won, but the victory had cost them almost everything. Sir, Lieutenant Commander Park Ji-hai said quietly, what do we do now?